You've done something amazing, Rosa, Jalen said, his voice full of pride. Your art speaks for itself. All I did was give you the space to show it. You earned this. Rosa smiled, her gratitude evident. I'll never forget what you've done for me, Jalen. You believed in me when no one else did. As Jalen left the meeting, he glanced toward the front of the gallery and caught sight of Derek. Their eyes met for a moment, but neither spoke. Derek looked defeated, a man who had once wielded immense power now standing on the outside, watching as the future of art moved on without him. Jalen didn't feel satisfaction in the moment. There was no triumph in seeing Derek fall. He had once been in Derek's shoes, chasing the validation of others, desperate to prove his worth. Now, he understood that success wasn't about revenge or proving people wrong. It was about creating something lasting, something meaningful. In the years that followed, Jalen's gallery continued to flourish. It became a model for what the art world could be, a place where creativity and authenticity were valued above all else. Other galleries began to follow suit, shifting their focus to support emerging artists, and the old systems that had once dictated success began to crumble. Jalen had not only changed his own life, he had changed the art world itself. And in doing so, he had given the power back to where it truly belonged, with the artists, the dreamers, and the rebels who dared to speak their truth. As for Derek, he eventually sold his gallery and faded into obscurity, a cautionary tale of what happens when art is reduced to a commodity and creativity is stifled in the name of profit. But his legacy, if it could be called that, was a reminder to Jalen and to the world: art is not just about what it's worth. It's about what it says. And in the end, it's the artists who shape the future, not the businessmen who try to control them. The sun hung low in the sky, casting a golden glow over the bustling streets of downtown. The air was thick with the hum of city life, yet for Marcus, the world around him felt distant, like a blur he was only half aware of. His steps were deliberate, his mind racing with anticipation, as he made his way toward one of the most exclusive art galleries in the city. It was a place where the world's most renowned artists showcased their work, where dreams were made, and egos were built. But for Marcus, it was more than just a gallery. It was the place that could transform his life. The doors of the gallery opened with a soft chime as Marcus entered. He was greeted by the cool, sterile air of the space, the smell of fresh paint and polished wood lingering in the background. The gallery's high ceilings gave it a sense of grandeur, and the white walls were adorned with pieces that ranged from abstract sculptures to vibrant, larger-than-life canvases. Everything here was designed to impress, to overwhelm, to make a statement. But none of it mattered to Marcus. His focus was singular. He had something to prove. Something that, if all went well today, would not just change his life, but the world's perception of him. A tall, middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair emerged from behind a large painting. His suit was impeccably tailored, his shoes polished to a mirror finish. This was the gallery owner, Robert Cunningham, a man whose opinion on art was revered by critics, collectors, and artists alike. His name was synonymous with success in the art world, and he had an almost mythical reputation for spotting talent. He was a man whose approval could send an artist's career skyrocketing, and whose rejection could doom it to obscurity. "Good afternoon," Robert said, his voice smooth, but with an edge that suggested he was always in control. His gaze flicked over Marcus, as if assessing him with a quick glance. "I'm Marcus," the young artist said, extending a hand, a slight tremor in his fingers that he couldn't quite control. His nerves were getting the best of him, but he had rehearsed this moment countless times. He would not let it slip away. "I brought my portfolio. I think you'll find my work interesting." Robert took the hand briefly, but did not offer a smile. Instead, he gestured toward a nearby chair. "Please, take a seat. Let's see what you've got." Marcus sat, his heart pounding in his chest. His hand shook slightly as he opened the portfolio, revealing a collection of his work, pieces that represented years of dedication, passion, and unspoken frustration. Each painting, each drawing, told a story of struggle and resilience. They were raw, expressive, and filled with the kind of energy that only someone who had lived through hardship could capture. Marcus had poured his soul into every brushstroke, every color choice, every detail. He had made something that was truly his own. Robert leaned in, adjusting his glasses as he glanced over the first piece. It was an abstract painting, bold strokes of red and black swirling together, a chaotic blend of emotion. It was a piece that Marcus had worked on for months, refining it to perfection. He had been inspired by the struggles of his youth, growing up in a neighborhood where survival often meant going against the odds. Robert's eyes flicked over the painting for a moment, then moved to the next one. The cold, critical expression on his face didn't change. Robert muttered, tapping his finger against his chin. Interesting technique, but the composition is too busy. Too much chaos, not enough structure. You see, art is about balance, control. The right proportions. He moved to the next piece, without giving Marcus a chance to respond. The next piece was a portrait, a striking, lifelike image of a man's face, every wrinkle and contour meticulously painted. Marcus had spent days on this piece, capturing the essence of his subject with incredible detail. It was a testament to his technical skill. But to Robert, it was just another portrait. Nice technique, Robert said, nodding. But portraits are a dime a dozen. The world doesn't need another portrait, no matter how skillfully painted. You need something new, something revolutionary. Something that will make people stop in their tracks. You're talented, but right now, your work feels too derivative. It doesn't speak to me. It doesn't push boundaries. Marcus's stomach churned. He had heard words like these before, dismissals, criticisms that seemed to follow him at every turn. But this was Robert Cunningham. This was the man who held the key to the art world, the man who could take him from a struggling artist to a household name. And here he was, rejecting him without even understanding the depth of his work. His hand tightened around the edge of the portfolio, but he forced himself to remain calm. He knew this was part of the game. Robert had heard it all before, every artist had to go through this to prove they had what it took. But Marcus wasn't like the others. His art wasn't just a way of making a living. It was his life, his legacy. He had no choice but to succeed. I understand your point, but I think you're missing the bigger picture, Marcus said, trying to steady his voice. My work is about more than technique. It's about telling a story, about making people feel something deep inside. It's not about being neat or controlled. It's about raw emotion, about capturing what's real in the world. Robert looked at him for a long moment, his eyes narrowing slightly as if he were weighing Marcus's words. But then, with a dismissive wave, he stood up. Look, I appreciate your passion, but the art market isn't interested in stories or feelings. It's about demand. It's about what people are willing to pay for. Right now, your work is too niche. You've got some talent, but you're not ready for the big leagues. I'd suggest you keep honing your skills and come back when you've got something that can really make waves. Marcus felt the weight of Robert's words sink in. He had been rejected, again. He had put everything he had into this meeting, and it had amounted to nothing. But he knew he couldn't give up. Not now. Not when he had come this far. Thank you for your time, Marcus said, his voice tight. He stood up, gathered his portfolio, and turned to leave. But as he reached the door, he stopped. He didn't turn around, but he knew Robert was watching him. He could feel the weight of the gallery owner's gaze, the air thick with unspoken judgment. And for a moment, just a moment, Marcus considered walking away. But he didn't. Instead, he left the gallery with his head held high, his heart still burning with the fire of determination. He knew that one day, Robert Cunningham would see the true value of his art. But by then, it would be too late. For Marcus had something Robert didn't, an understanding of his worth. The streets felt quieter as Marcus walked away from the gallery, the weight of Robert's dismissal heavy on his shoulders. The evening sky had darkened, and the city lights flickered to life, casting their glow over the concrete jungle. but Marcus barely noticed the beauty of the world around him. His mind was too busy, too filled with a storm of thoughts that wouldn't let him rest. His steps were mechanical as he moved through the crowded streets, not really seeing the faces of the people around him. He was replaying the conversation over and over in his mind, trying to make sense of it. Robert had been dismissive, yes, but what really hurt was the subtle contempt in his tone, the way he had belittled Marcus's work as if it were nothing more than a fleeting attempt at artistry. But Marcus knew better. He knew his art was something extraordinary. Each piece he created was a manifestation of his deepest emotions, his experiences, his pain, and his joy. He wasn't just an artist, he was a storyteller, someone who used color and form to capture the essence of what it meant to be human. And that, Robert Cunningham could never understand. The moment Marcus reached his apartment, he threw his jacket onto the couch and sat down at his small desk. The room was cluttered with canvases, sketches, and paint supplies. It wasn't much, but it was his world. Here, in this space, Marcus was free. Free to create, free to be himself. He stared at the canvas before him, a blank, white expanse that was waiting for him to breathe life into it. But tonight, his mind wasn't focused on creating something new. Instead, he was thinking of how far he had come, of the long and difficult journey that had led him to this moment. For the world, Marcus was just another struggling artist, a dreamer trying to break into an industry that was notoriously difficult to penetrate. He had spent years perfecting his craft, learning the techniques that would one day set him apart from the thousands of others who called themselves artists. But what they didn't know was that Marcus had a secret. He wasn't just an artist trying to make a name for himself. He was a man who had already made millions, without anyone knowing who he truly was. The truth was, Marcus had been living a double life. He had created his art under a pseudonym, a name that was nothing like his own. His works, while raw and emotional, also appealed to a more exclusive market, collectors who sought out the next big thing. His art was expensive, not because of some flashy branding, but because of its intrinsic value. Marcus had been selling his paintings in private auctions, and while the world knew nothing about him, a select few had already paid millions for his work. But he hadn't done it for the money. He hadn't done it for the fame. No, he had done it because he knew he was capable of something greater. He had always known that his art was worth far more than people gave it credit for. And while Robert Cunningham was busy looking down on his work, the world's most discerning collectors were bidding on it, oblivious to the fact that they were buying masterpieces from someone they had never even heard of. Marcus had built his fortune in silence, away from the spotlight, carefully cultivating his identity as an artist who didn't need the approval of the established art world to succeed. He had done it in the shadows, and it had worked. His paintings, while not yet recognized by the mainstream, had earned him a reputation that stretched across continents. But despite his success, he knew the time had come to reveal himself, not as an anonymous artist, but as someone who would challenge the very system that had once rejected him. He wasn't going to play the game on anyone else's terms anymore. He had been patient, had bided his time, but now it was time to take control. He knew exactly what he needed to do next. The next day, Marcus visited a lawyer's office. With a quiet nod, he handed over a signed contract that would change the course of his career forever. The gallery he had been rejected from was about to undergo a transformation that would be entirely his doing. Marcus had spent the past year quietly observing Robert Cunningham's gallery, analyzing its weaknesses, and finding the cracks in its seemingly perfect facade. He knew the gallery had financial troubles, that it needed something, or rather someone, to breathe new life into it. And he was the person who could do that. With a small but significant amount of paperwork, Marcus became the gallery's new owner. It wasn't an easy deal to close. The gallery had been struggling to maintain its relevance in an ever-changing market. While Robert Cunningham's name still commanded respect, the gallery itself had become stagnant, clinging to outdated practices that no longer appealed to the modern art world. Marcus didn't waste any time. The moment he acquired the gallery, he began making changes, small, strategic changes that would slowly shift its direction and focus. He brought in fresh talent, introduced innovative marketing strategies, and started creating an environment where artists weren't just about selling their work for a high price. They were about being seen and heard. About telling their stories to an audience that truly cared. And he knew that, with this acquisition, he would soon have the power to reshape the art world in his image. He had already built an empire of his own, but now, it was time to step into the light. The world would no longer see him as a nobody, as just another struggling artist. He would be recognized for what he truly was, a visionary. But there was one more thing. Robert Cunningham, the man who had mocked his art and dismissed him as just another wannabe artist, had no idea what was coming. Marcus had a plan, one that would not only change the course of his career, but also change the way the world saw art. And he was going to make sure that Robert would be the last person to know it was him pulling the strings. Marcus leaned back in his chair, staring out the window. The city lights flickered below, a reflection of his own burgeoning empire. He had a new identity now, a new role to play. Soon, Robert would find out who Marcus really was. And when that day came, it would be too late for him to turn back. Marcus wasn't just going to be an artist anymore. He was going to be a force in the art world, and Robert Cunningham's rejection would only serve to make his triumph even sweeter. The days following Marcus's acquisition of the gallery passed in a whirlwind. Behind the polished, white walls and meticulously curated exhibits, changes were happening at an unseen level. While the public remained unaware, the shifts were already taking shape. Marcus had made his move, and now it was only a matter of time before the world would see the effects. Robert Cunningham had no idea what was about to happen. He continued to maintain his usual air of superiority, strolling through the gallery with the same haughty confidence that had served him for decades. His focus was on maintaining appearances, on keeping the gallery's legacy intact, while Marcus worked quietly behind the scenes to build something far more valuable. The gallery's financial situation had worsened over the past few years. Despite Robert's reputation and influence, the art market was changing, and the gallery's once thriving business model was now out of touch with the evolving demands of the industry. The art world was no longer just about high prices and prestigious names, it was about innovation, accessibility, and authenticity. Robert had failed to see these changes and, instead, clung to his old-school methods. And in doing so, he had driven away the new generation of buyers who craved something more than just traditional, expensive art. But Marcus saw the cracks. He could feel the desperation that lingered in every corner of the gallery. He knew that if he wanted to make this work, he would need to secure one thing that Robert had lost: relevance. The first step was simple. The gallery needed a new star. A name that would bring in the collectors, the critics, the art enthusiasts who had all but forgotten the gallery's importance. The world needed to see that this space was still alive, still capable of producing groundbreaking art. And Marcus was the one who could make that happen. He started by reaching out to several emerging artists, each with a unique voice and vision that hadn't been fully recognized. He didn't want just another group of painters who could create technically perfect pieces. He wanted those who could break the mold, challenge expectations, and ignite conversations. These artists were the future, the ones who would shape the art scene in the years to come. But he knew he couldn't just buy their work. No, he needed to be part of the larger story, the story of their success. One of these artists was an up-and-coming painter named Naomi Clark. She was a genius, her pieces filled with a raw emotional energy that was nearly impossible to ignore. Her work was both unsettling and beautiful, an exploration of the human psyche and the way emotions could be expressed through color. But despite her immense talent, Naomi's name had yet to gain traction in the competitive art world. She hadn't found the right gallery to propel her career to the next level, and as a result, her work was left largely in the shadows. Marcus saw the potential in her art immediately. He didn't just want to buy a painting, he wanted to bring her into the fold and make her the centerpiece of his new vision for the gallery. If he could get her work on the walls of the gallery, he knew it would attract a completely different clientele, one that craved authenticity and innovation. Marcus reached out to Naomi through a series of emails, arranging a meeting under the guise of being an anonymous art buyer interested in her work. At first, Naomi was cautious. She had been burned by the art world before, had seen her work sold for far less than it deserved, and was wary of anyone who wanted to exploit her talent. But Marcus was different. He had done his homework, knew her background, and understood the value of her work in a way that most people didn't. The meeting was set for a small cafe on the edge of town, away from the glittering art world that so often tried to suffocate the life out of artists. When Naomi arrived, she was surprised to find a man in his early 30s, dressed casually but with an air of quiet confidence. Marcus wasn't the typical art buyer. He wasn't flashy, wasn't here to brag about his wealth or connections. Instead, he spoke passionately about her art, about the way her pieces made him feel, about the stories they told. By the end of the meeting, Naomi was intrigued. She hadn't expected to find someone who not only understood her work, but also believed in its value. Marcus offered to buy a collection of her pieces, but more than that, he offered to help her build the career she deserved. He wanted to represent her, not just as an artist, but as a revolutionary force in the art world. Naomi, uncertain but excited, agreed to work with him. With Naomi Clark's work now part of the gallery's collection, Marcus set his sights on transforming the space itself. The gallery's existing exhibition style, cold, sterile, and overly formal, did nothing to inspire creativity or excitement. Marcus wanted the space to feel like a living, breathing entity, one that reflected the energy and passion of the artists it showcased. He began to introduce interactive elements to the gallery, virtual reality installations that allowed visitors to experience the creation of a painting, immersive spaces where viewers could step into the world of the artist's mind. The gallery was no longer just a place to view art, it became an experience, one that engaged the audience on a deeper level. And then there was the opening night. Marcus planned an event that would make the art world take notice. It wasn't just about throwing a lavish party or inviting a few big-name buyers, it was about creating an atmosphere of anticipation and excitement. He invited the critics, the buyers, the influencers, and the artists. Naomi's work would be the centerpiece, and it would be presented in a way that highlighted her immense talent. The event would be a celebration of all the things the gallery had been missing, a celebration of innovation, creativity, and passion. The night arrived, and the gallery buzzed with energy. The room was filled with murmurs of excitement as guests moved from one piece to the next. Naomi's paintings, vivid, haunting, and full of life, drew in the crowd like moths to a flame. Marcus watched from the sidelines, a smile playing at the corner of his mouth. This was his moment. When Robert Cunningham arrived, he was visibly taken aback. The gallery had never felt this alive, this relevant. The art on the walls was not just expensive, it was powerful. It spoke to something deeper than the surface-level beauty he had once prided himself on. Naomi's work, in particular, was drawing attention from every direction. Robert knew something had changed. He just didn't know that the changes were Marcus's doing. As the evening went on, the art buyers and critics began to talk. They weren't just admiring the work, they were recognizing its true value. And they weren't just impressed by the art itself, they were impressed by the vision behind it. Marcus had managed to create an atmosphere of excitement and innovation, one that made the gallery feel like the center of the art world once more. And as Robert Cunningham made his way through the crowd, the realization began to settle in: this gallery, this space that had once been his kingdom, was now on the verge of something far greater than he had ever imagined. What he didn't know, however, was that Marcus had only just begun. The real revolution had only just started. The evening's energy carried into the early morning hours. The gallery's grand reopening had been nothing short of a success. The critics, collectors, and artists who had wandered through the newly revamped space had all left buzzing with excitement. Naomi Clark's artwork, framed in an entirely new light, was getting rave reviews, with whispers about her potential to become a future star of the art world. The visitors had praised the fresh atmosphere, the immersive experiences, and the energy that had radiated through every inch of the gallery. It was clear, Marcus had succeeded in creating something much more than just a gallery. he had cultivated a movement. But for Robert Cunningham, the event was something far more difficult to process. He was a man who had been at the top of the art world for decades, revered and untouchable, his reputation as a tastemaker unchallenged. His gallery had been the launchpad for countless artists, and his opinion was one that the industry respected. He had grown comfortable in his position, as if the art world existed to revolve around him. Yet tonight, that foundation had cracked. As Robert mingled through the crowd, offering his usual stiff smiles and forced pleasantries, something in the atmosphere unsettled him. There was a new energy in the room, an excitement that he hadn't seen in years. The artists present weren't simply showing off their work, they were engaging, discussing, sharing ideas. The guests weren't just admiring the paintings, they were connecting with the artists, understanding their stories, feeling the emotion behind every brushstroke. And it wasn't just Naomi who was capturing attention. It was the entire approach to the gallery, the immersive experiences, the way art was being presented as an experience rather than just a display. The walls no longer felt cold and distant, they felt alive, as though they were participating in the art itself. The critics who had once lauded Robert's galleries were now whispering excitedly about this new direction. Some were even hinting that this was the future of art. But Robert couldn't shake the feeling that the gallery he had once built was no longer his own. His heart sank as he realized just how much he had lost touch with the changing tides of the art world. The success of this evening wasn't a testament to his vision, it was a testament to someone else's. Marcus's vision. Marcus stood across the room, observing the entire event with quiet satisfaction. He didn't need to be the center of attention. In fact, he preferred to remain on the periphery, watching the shifts he had set into motion. He had orchestrated this transformation with such precision that even Robert, who had once been his harshest critic, couldn't ignore the impact it had on the gallery's reputation. As the night wore on, Robert found himself drawn to Marcus. There was something magnetic about him, a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. It was clear that Marcus had not just transformed the gallery, he had transformed the entire dynamic of the art world itself. And Robert could feel it. He could feel his grip on the industry slipping, the foundation of his empire crumbling beneath his feet. Robert approached Marcus, his steps slow, deliberate, as if he were entering foreign territory. There was a slight tremor in his hands, something he had never allowed himself to show. He had never needed to admit to weakness, but tonight that pride was fraying at the edges. "Quite the night," Robert said, trying to maintain his usual air of control. "I didn't expect the shift in energy to be so palpable." Marcus looked up at him, his expression unreadable, but his eyes sharp. "You never saw the cracks in the foundation," Marcus replied, his voice calm but carrying weight. "You were so focused on maintaining an illusion of control that you didn't realize the world was changing around you. Art isn't just about technique or status anymore. It's about connection. It's about emotion. It's about telling a story that people can relate to." Robert's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he didn't respond. The reality of the situation was sinking in. Marcus wasn't just another artist who wanted to break into the gallery scene. He was an innovator. A disruptor. And, in this moment, Robert knew that the gallery was no longer his domain, it was Marcus's. "I see you've learned a lot about the art world," Robert said, his voice tight, but there was an underlying respect in his words. "But you still have a lot to prove. You can't just change things overnight." Marcus smiled, but it wasn't one of triumph. It was a smile of understanding, of someone who knew exactly how the game was played. "I've already proven what I need to," he replied. "I've already proven that the art world doesn't need to stay stuck in the past. And now, it's time for you to accept that." Robert felt the weight of Marcus's words. It was true. The world had changed, and he had been too slow to see it. For years, he had held on to his old ways, his old ideas about art, about success, about reputation. But what Marcus was offering wasn't just a new way of doing things. It was a new world. The next few days were a whirlwind. The gallery buzzed with press and social media coverage, all centered around the dramatic changes that had taken place. Naomi's work was being sold for astronomical prices, with new buyers lining up to add her pieces to their collections. And Marcus, the quiet mastermind behind it all, had suddenly become a name to watch in the art world. He was no longer just a struggling artist. He was a buyer, a tastemaker, and now the owner of the very gallery that had once turned him away. Robert, on the other hand, was being questioned by the press and critics alike. How had he missed the signs of change? Why had he not embraced the new direction that the art world was heading in? Some wondered if Robert's time had passed, and whether he could still lead the gallery in the way he had before. There was no denying that Marcus's arrival had rocked the art world to its core, and it wasn't just because of Naomi's talent. It was because Marcus had done something Robert had never been able to do. He had made the gallery relevant again. He had done what Robert couldn't even see needed to be done. And it was only a matter of time before the entire art world knew that Robert Cunningham's era had ended. But Marcus wasn't concerned with Robert's legacy. He wasn't interested in playing the same games that had once held him back. His focus was on something far bigger, the future. His future. The future of art. And now that he had control, the game was his to win. He leaned back in his office, looking out over the city. There was no turning back now. Marcus had carved a place for himself in the art world, and he was going to make sure that it was one that would stand for generations to come. And Robert, well, he was now just a relic of the past. The days after the grand reopening had passed in a blur of excitement and change, but the ripples of Marcus's success were far from settled. Robert Cunningham, once the pillar of the art world, now found himself caught in a storm of scrutiny. The critics, who had once fawned over him, were now questioning his vision, his ability to adapt, and his relevance in an industry that had shifted right beneath his feet. Marcus had not just outdone him, he had obliterated the very foundation that Robert had built his empire upon. The press had latched onto the story like sharks to blood. Headlines were filled with phrases like "the old guard of art world left behind," and "how Marcus replaced Robert Cunningham in a matter of months." Robert's gallery, once the destination for the world's top artists, was now nothing more than a backdrop in a larger narrative that didn't include him. The man who had been at the forefront of the art scene for decades had become a relic, a footnote in a story that was quickly being written by someone else. Robert had spent his career championing the established, the tried and true, and the recognized. His world had been about names like his own, and the well-known artists whose works adorned the walls of his gallery. But Marcus's world was different. It wasn't about names, it was about stories. It was about emotion, connection, and the future. And Robert wasn't part of that future. Sitting alone in his office, surrounded by the remnants of the gallery's past, old art, outdated contracts, and records of deals that had long since passed their prime, Robert struggled to breathe life into what he had once taken for granted. His reputation, once enough to fill rooms with eager buyers and critics, now seemed hollow. The phone calls had slowed to a trickle, and the inquiries from collectors had all but dried up. Marcus, on the other hand, seemed to be flourishing in every sense. With Naomi Clark's paintings becoming the centerpiece of the gallery, and new artists clamoring for a chance to be represented by him, Marcus was becoming a central figure in the art world. He had carefully cultivated his public image, one that was grounded in authenticity, vision, and innovation. He wasn't just a buyer or a gallery owner. He was a curator of stories, a creator of spaces where people could truly engage with art, and not just view it from a distance. Robert had to admit, though it burned him, that Marcus had proven something. The art world was no longer about preserving the old ways, but about pushing boundaries and embracing what was new and exciting. Marcus had seen that before Robert had. And now that the public had caught on, there was no going back. But Robert was nothing if not determined. He wasn't ready to surrender the position he had fought for over so many years. The art world had been his domain, and he wasn't about to let it slip away without a fight. His first instinct was to push back, to try to reclaim his place at the head of the industry. But Marcus was no longer a naive upstart. He was a threat, a formidable one. Robert had to be strategic. He had to find a way to make people remember why he had once been revered. It wasn't going to be easy, but Robert wasn't known for giving up easily. Meanwhile, Marcus remained focused on his vision. He was quickly establishing himself not just as a gallery owner, but as a cultural force. The industry had noticed. Influencers, buyers, and artists all wanted a piece of what Marcus was building. The gallery's new direction had breathed fresh air into the art world, and it was beginning to feel like the center of a creative revolution. People were flocking to the gallery not just for the art, but for the experience, the conversation, and the connection. And yet, while everything appeared to be going according to plan, Marcus knew that the battle with Robert was far from over. He wasn't naive enough to believe that Robert would just let him take over without a fight. Robert had built his reputation on dominating the art world, and there was no way he would go down quietly. Marcus had to stay vigilant. He had to be ready for whatever move Robert might make next. In the midst of this, Marcus received an unexpected visit. It was from a group of top art investors, people who had been watching him closely, considering whether or not to back him. They had heard whispers of his success, his vision, and his ability to reshape the art world. Now, they wanted in. They offered Marcus an opportunity that most would have killed for, the chance to expand his empire on a global scale. They were offering him the financial backing to open galleries in major cities around the world, to create an art movement that would rival any institution. Marcus, ever the strategist, listened carefully. He knew this was a pivotal moment. Expanding so quickly could either propel him into global recognition or spread his resources too thin. But with his eye firmly on the future, he saw it as an opportunity to cement his place as the dominant force in the art world. He had already begun the transformation of Robert's gallery, but now it was time to take things even further. The world had already seen the art scene shift. It was time to make sure that Marcus was the one leading the charge. As he signed the contract to secure the investors' backing, Marcus felt a rush of excitement. This wasn't just about the money. It wasn't about fame or prestige. It was about changing the way people viewed art, and in doing so, changing the way they viewed the world. Marcus knew that he wasn't just going to be an art dealer, he was going to be a cultural architect, shaping the future of artistic expression. Meanwhile, Robert's frustration grew. He had watched Marcus's rise with a mixture of awe and resentment.